Welcome to our public lecture. It is called Future of Data 2050. It is an exciting topic for me, and I hope it is also an exciting topic for you, because today we were going to talk about the future and also the data management, and also a bit about AI and IoT and all those technology related to public sector and also related to our daily lives. So it is more than necessary for us to understand the whole spectrum of the technology and how it is actually relate to ourselves in the future. Will AI change will AI take over our jobs, or say, will the robots actually, be more superior than the humans? So that kind of intriguing issues are going to be discussed and guided through from this talk. So enjoy.
All right, Ibu Tilma, thank you so much. Can you hear me clearly?
Yes, perfectly, Pa.
And you can see me as well?
Yes.
All right. So what I would like to do is talk today a little bit about, as the title indicates, the future of data in 2050. And the reason for 2050 is that a very famous scientist in artificial intelligence, Kurzweil, wrote an interesting book on artificial intelligence, and he said that in 2045, 2050, there is a possibility that artificial intelligence may take over from human beings, or let's say, become as intelligent as human beings. So what I want to talk about is really what's the function of the function of data in our society, in business and in government. And the slides you can see here, the one I put up, the first one is basically looking at, okay, if we are living in a society with an abundance of data and raw material of information, how do we give meaning? How do we deal with this abundance of raw material? And so it's a question of how can we make data turn into information and knowledge? And although any business, and that's the perspective I guess I take as a business consultant, as a business professor, I'm looking at the issues around procedures and regulations of how decisions are made as a corporate governance expert. But what I'll do today is I will broaden it up a little bit and look at, okay, if we look at the future, what are the disruptive factors that we can or we need to take into account? And issues, as you can see from the slides, it's to do with an unequal society in terms of income. There's issues around education, there is issues about infrastructure, and so on and so forth. But the one that I really want to focus is technology. And technology really in terms of how machines and computers will influence our life. And my narrative will be that we should not be afraid of computers, but we should see them as potential as potential tools that helps us to augment our decision-making or augment the ability of decision-making on one hand. And likely it is true that it will be used to automate certain processes. So my real idea is that we should collaborate, but should be collaboration between humans and and human beings. And that brings me then really to the 6 questions that I want to answer. And they're around, first, what are data, why we should look at data, and second, the issue around the future. And the questions you see here that I will, for the first 30, 40 minutes, will try to really deconstruct why do we need data? And so that's the first question, why data? Second is, what's the difference between how machines learn and how humans learn, okay? And the third one is really, okay, if we have this data, obviously that will lead to opportunities for business, but also we should be aware of issues around privacy and issues around even cyber threats and so on and so forth. So I call that the good, the bad, and the ugly. And then I'm focusing more on the future in the second part, which is really about how do we make decisions facing an uncertain future? And that will lead to risk management that embraces, one hand, heuristics, but also algorithms. I will try to explain that part. And of course, the last 2 questions is, should we be afraid that computers will take over? Number 1, and number 2, will their jobs be lost? And yes, there will be some jobs or tasks be lost, but we should not be afraid. And then I will finish by looking at the implications on business, society, and government. Okay, so that's basically the idea that I want to deal with. So let's go straight to the issue of big data and why are data important and crucial. Now, I believe if you would define intelligence, you could argue an intelligence, both so-called machine intelligence versus human intelligence. You could say that intelligence is the process that converts unstructured raw data into useful information and actionable knowledge. And so the scheme, and I'm not going to explain it in detail, but the scheme we're looking at here, this slide, is basically machine learning and machine intelligence. And there's a huge evolution. Again, unfortunately, we won't have the time right now to do this, but there's a huge evolution in artificial intelligence since the 50s, 1950s. In fact, even earlier, it started with Alan Turing in 36. But the point is that since the 90s and the early 2000s, artificial intelligence has moved forward in a sense that it was able to mimic a little bit how a brain works. And the whole issue why machine learning was becoming more powerful was, first of all, computers allowed it to happen, but also we had access to big data. And third, the architecture of this machine learning was in these layers. When we talk about expert system, which you had in the 70s and the 80s, it was basically a fundamental, maybe some complex algorithm, but it has only one layer. We humans, we have different layers. And so computer science has learned to mimic that. And as you see there, just briefly at the slide, the way we do voice and image recognition is exactly that. We were not able to do this 20 years ago. In fact, if you talk about the future and the past, think about this. 30 years ago, we didn't have a mobile phone. Now we have mobile phones. So what I want to do now is look 30 years ahead. What does that mean? Now, today, we don't have just a mobile phone. Our mobile phones even can recognize images automatically almost, based on a structure that I may be able to explain later on. But point though is that artificial intelligence and the science that we see that is being developed is really able to use neural networks where you have raw material that is put into layers and allowing us to predict, let's say, the future based on data through which the computer seeks to find patterns. And I think that's crucial and different from something that you did see 20 years ago. So why data are important? Because data are being the new oil for our world. And why is that? Because with big data, it allows us through computerization and digitization to find patterns that we human beings may not be able to see that easily. So that's one thing that allows us to move forward. Now, practically speaking, you see here, this slide is showing you that in the fields of traveling, online traveling, transportation, automotive industry, retail, we all have seen that. In this kind of industries, artificial intelligence will start to have an increasingly important role in how our business is conducted, right? Now, if you look at big data, it is basically used in 52% today for process automation, okay? About 35% is about cognitive insights. And what we mean by that is that it allows us, human beings, to use computers to make better predictions and therefore better decisions. And a small portion today, about 13% of the applications are used for what we call here cognitive engagement, whether it's through natural language processing, chatbots, or intelligence assistants. I mean, the Siris and Alexas of this world that allow us to basically engage and provide us feedback or whatever it is. But at the end of the day, what we call artificial intelligence today in the deep learning machines, they only can work and function because of the big data. Without big data, we wouldn't be able to do this. And so we call this basically supervised learning, where data are trained into the computer and allows them to predict the future by finding patterns, okay? So that's in a nutshell how we look at the issue of artificial intelligence and human intelligence. The big difference, though, between what would I call, and here there's a second one, between machine learning and human learning is that it looks from neuroscientific perspective, and I'll just show you this kind of slide. It looks that babies, for example, have a kind of innate structure, architecture, if you like, that allows them to model the world and understand the world and give meaning to the world in a quite amazing manner that computers cannot do yet. And a major reason is that somehow we humans think in causal relationships, whereas computers, they only look at patterns which are correlations that are not necessarily causal. They don't understand. So some people may have, I mean, I've heard people saying that computers can be very smart. Yes, but basically they're extremely fast and they can be extremely powerful, but they're dumb. They're dumb machines on steroids. And what I mean by that is that it is true that through big data, and as I will show you in a minute, there's a lot of applications in business and whatever that could help us to use this data, but it doesn't understand really the essence of a phenomena or whatever we do. Whereas humans, we immediately understand the essence. We really form from raw material to knowledge in an extremely effective manner. We don't need a lot of data. Babies only need 1, 2, 3 examples a few times and they understand. Machines can never do that. It's because of the big data that are able to find patterns because they don't understand. They only look to correlations. So that's one big issue that I want to emphasize, that there is a big difference between how humans learn and how machines learn, despite the fact that today artificial intelligence is trying to mimic the brain. We ourselves don't know exactly how the brain works fully. We start to have a good idea, but for example, within neuroscience, it's unclear what self-consciousness is, okay? We start to have a good grasp of what conscious means, but self-conscious, it's very hard, let alone a machine. Okay, and I'll come back to that when we talk about the issue around singularity. But what I want, what I want to emphasize is that basically learning is to form basically an internal model that we apply to the external world. You could even argue that humans innately are extremely good statisticians. They know how to think in probabilities, not with big data, but they know very well how to predict how the world should look like and how people or things will react in a particular world. Okay, so that's thing that I want to emphasize. And why are human brains much better today than the current AI computers driven by big data? It is because we have language that allows us to communicate in a very flexible manner, which computers cannot. We also have an incredible high level of plasticity of the brain, and we immediately can adapt to a changed environment. I mean, we all have heard of the IBM Watson that beat Kasparov, the chess player. We have heard how AlphaGo was able to beat Go. I mean, incredibly achievements by the computer, but don't ask the computer to bring you a cup of coffee. What I mean by that is a computer is extreme, and especially artificial intelligence as we define it, and machines in a way, deep learning machines are extremely good in solving a particular problem, but they cannot be flexible and move that to a completely different environment or different context. We humans can, machines cannot. And third, we can have intentions. Humans can intervene. We can set up objectives and rules. Computers cannot do that by themselves. They don't have that autonomous self-awareness, if you like. They cannot self-reflect about who they are or what they are, okay? Whereas humans can, and that makes it for us, makes us, our intelligence in a sense, superior to human computers for the time being. And now just one more practical thing also to show you a little bit, to maybe not to confuse you, but how do you generate better ideas? And this is just Twitter, and this is something that I do sometimes in business schools, where I'm asking, you're looking here, two employees, okay? Employee A and employee B, and they both have a kind of a Twitter network, okay? And why I'm showing that is because learning has to do also with networks and how networks are functioning. But here, you're just looking at two different kind of people, and if you would be an employer or you would be a university, which one would you employ? Would you employ number A or would you employ number B? And quite often I hear people saying we should go for number B because he has a huge dense network, so that's useful. Maybe true, but a lot of that dense network you see here in employee B is nothing as echo rooms, as we call it, meaning it reinforces known ideas. There's nothing new about those ideas. They're talking to each other, okay? Whereas employee A has really a much more diverse network. That person may read neuroscience, may read artificial intelligence, may read history, psychology, philosophy, business, whatever it is. And that brings the person in an ability, or provides the person with the ability to link different dots. And that's how science basically, of course, proceeds. So again, it's not having the most dense network that is crucial. It's about what are the different dots that you can link. Okay, that just as an intermezzo. That brings me to, I guess, more the mundane part, the good, the bad, and the ugly of artificial intelligence. And artificial intelligence, I repeat, that is fueled and driven by big data. And we all, I'm just going to show you a couple. There are many, obviously. We all know Netflix. We know Amazon. Why are they so successful? Because they are able to, through their recommendation engine, which is nothing as an artificial intelligence algorithm that allows them to predict what behavior you will show, or in particular case of Netflix, what movie you like. And because they can predict that very accurately, they're now moving into content provision, meaning they invest in making movies for Netflix itself. And movie making and displaying movies is a very different business, but they daring to make that switch because they have a very accurate idea of what kind of movies people like, and therefore their success rate is higher. Another one is where data-driven AI applications are interesting is this airport here at Schiphol in Amsterdam in the Netherlands, where Philips traditionally would sell lamps. Now today, the business model of Philips has changed. It is not anymore about the organization Philips selling lamps. It is about selling light, which means the business model has changed because now through big data, company knows exactly when they need to replace the light or the bulbs. They know how to reduce energy and so on and so forth. So even here you see an application how AI can lead to higher sustainability. This is another example of a company, an American company, Stitch Fix, which basically looks at this lady came up with the idea, can I have data that can predict what the fashion will be or what the people would like to have? And she came up with a great algorithm that works, and with designers combined humans and was it now artificial intelligence like Netflix that is predicting quite accurately what clothes a professional lady would like to have, and why is it working? Because a lot of professional ladies don't have the time to go shopping, and on Saturday they have other things to do than just go to the shop. So now you be delivered your stuff by this company. So that's another example of an AI application. This is another one. General Electric, for example, is using the engines they're selling to Airbus and Boeing, where they have chips now into the machine that measures the fuel usage. It measures when it needs to be maintained, and so on and so forth. So these are all big data that now through the cloud are getting back to headquarters General Electric, allowing them not to sell just that machine, but renting it, leasing it, meaning they are selling power. They're not selling that machine anymore. Again, leading to different business models. And it's all about recommendation based on data that are allowing us to predict the outcomes very accurately. We have Airbnb that you're familiar. We have the issues about visual and speech recognition, and so on and so forth. So there are many applications that are used now in business and enabling customers to have a job to be done in a better and more effective way. And I'm using this term deliberately, a job to be done, because that's basically what business is all about. What kind, if any product or service that you have, whether you're an entrepreneur or a big organization, it's about how do you deliver that for doing a job for a customer that has an issue, be it light, be it watching movies, be it choosing your clothes, be it renting an engine or a car, whatever it is, okay? And so these are all good applications or the benefits of data-driven applications. But that brings me to the bad or the darker side of AI. And very briefly, I'm just watching my time a little bit, there are a lot of risks. There's the issue of biases because the data we use are biased. There's no doubt in my mind. It's about fairness as well. Do AI applications always do the right thing? Is it fair? Not necessarily, because the data set that we're using, which are historical, may not be fair in itself. And I'm thinking about predictive policing in cities like Chicago or anywhere where they're looking at, okay, we know from the past that in particular areas, there is a high rate of criminality. So in order to reduce the crime, they're using artificial intelligence now to accurately predict where crime may take place and therefore send police. But that's not fair because somehow you then basically reinforce that in particular blocks within Chicago or New York or any of the big cities, that you have indeed a population that is more criminal than others. Is that fair? Maybe not, because our justice system says you're innocent until proven guilty. Okay, and so this is an issue. We have the whole issue around unethical use of data, blackmailing, the issue that we have all heard of with Cambridge Analytica and Facebook, the issue of your autonomy, because more and more, you know, people will lose their autonomy. The computer will do it for you. Issue of the privacy, obviously, the issue of cyber threats. These are issues that we have to think of, all right? And then there's the ugly part of AI, and more particularly the issue of surveillance capitalism, which is a term by Harvard Professor Zuboff. How far will we allow artificial intelligence to encroach upon our daily life? And I guess in the corona crisis, as we face today, the debate is, okay, having an application that will follow you where you are in order to reduce the health of other people. Now that's an example which you can question. It's a good thing, but there's a darker side behind that we should be aware of. And then the other issue, of course, or example is that artificial intelligence weapons. I mean, it's as having a knife. A knife is a neutral tool. A knife can be used for a lot of positive things, but obviously it can be also a weapon. And similar with artificial intelligence. Artificial intelligence is something that has a lot of benefits to carry, but it can be used in a very destructive manner. AI drones, for example. Now, the research and the scientists are very worried and concerned about this, and they do everything not to do this. But again, atomic power can be quite useful, but we have seen the destructive force of that. So the same thing is applying to artificial intelligence. And that brings me to, for a few more minutes, to the issue around the future. And I will be brief. First of all, when we talk about the future, it's about, okay, how we deal with future. And I'm thinking about risk. And risk basically is nothing else as have an understanding of the probability, the likelihood that something will happen, and the impact it may have. Now, if you make that concrete in business language, it basically means how can we use artificial intelligence that allows us to augment our decision power, and one, and second, how do we use it to automate certain tasks that are boring or that are repetitive. And so the point I'm trying to make here is that when we talk about the future that is uncertain, we have to think from a risk perspective. And that means, as I will show you here very briefly, there are two basic extremes. One is at the left-hand side here, if you don't have data, if you don't have a lot of data available, we humans are very good through our evolution and survival in the evolution. We're very good in using rules of thumbs, which are somehow called intuition or gut feelings that are extremely actionable, but they can be very biased. And as you see from the figure here, if we would make the calculation, okay, the whistling around that tree there, is that danger or not? If we would apply a statistical model, we would be dead if it would be a lion or a snake. So we have learned to survive by reacting very fast on almost no data. And so we translate that now in business by having heuristics, by having very simple rules that if we don't have a lot of data can be applied. But the negative side is it can be very biased. And there's a lot of literature. I just referred to one person, Professor Kahneman, who got the Nobel Prize economics for that, who was a psychologist who basically distinguishes system one thinking, which he calls the heuristic thinking, which is fast and biased, versus the system two thinking, which is analytical, which is much slower but more profound. And then you can bring that to the right-hand side, the algorithms, which allows through the availability of big data to basically automate to a high extent our decision making, or using artificial intelligence automated, but to augment our decision making. Example there is in medical diagnostics. It is quite clear now that computers can do a great job in detecting, for example, and predicting based on a pattern on an X-ray, whether you have a certain disease, cancer, or whatever it is. You still need a medical doctor to tell the patient basically, but artificial intelligence can definitely be very useful. And so basically, if we talk about the future, yes, we definitely should use artificial intelligence because it can allow us to make better decisions. That brings me then to the last but one issue, the question whether computers will take over from humans. And my perspective is rather simple here. At the moment, we have what we call weak artificial intelligence, basically robots or algorithms, digitization, all the things that we briefly have mentioned, but still remains under the control of humans, okay? All the examples that I've shown you so far, we still are in charge. Now, when Ray Kurzweil provocatively spoke and wrote that book on singularity, he was saying, we will be able, or we meaning computers will be able to become as intelligent as human beings. Now, and he mentioned 2045, 2050 as a possibility. You have to understand that, first of all, we just, in neuroscience at least, just start to understand what consciousness means, what intelligence means. But we do not have an idea yet about self-consciousness as a human being, let alone assuming that a computer can be self-conscious. So I don't think that a computer will be able to take over or become as intelligent. I'm not saying it will never happen. I don't know that. But I don't think in the next 30 years it will happen. We will have enormous development of applications with AI and big data, but we won't see the computer taking over, because I don't see a computer thinking in causal terms and be able to imagine things and be self-reflective or having even a conscious. I don't see that happening. And so I'm not so much concerned because the computer doesn't think in causal terms. And that brings me to the last question, which is related to the previous one. And I think I like this kind of picture, which shows here the computer was programmed to clean, okay? And it cleans every day, let's say between 10 and 4. But on a Sunday, for example, it does the same thing. And of course, the person, as you see there, says, wow, why did you wake me up? Because, of course, it's programmed to do the job every day between 10 and 4 p.m. The computer does not understand context. So if you slightly change because you like to have a sleep in on a weekend, the computer doesn't understand that. He cannot emotionally understand that or contextually interpret it. He doesn't understand the essence because he doesn't think in causal terms. He only looks at patterns and he does a certain job. So therefore, I don't think that computers are as intelligent and will not be in the near future either. I don't see that happening. So that's clear. Now that brings me to the question, will they take over from humans? And here's an example of finance in a bank. And you're looking at just some, what I call tasks. If you look to general accounting and operations, most likely the next 20, 30 years, you see indeed a lot of automation that will happen and where computers will take over. Similarly to cash disbursements, okay? ATMs are all what you see already. Revenue management, similar. Financial controlling and external reporting, all that, yes. But where the computer will not take over is where you have external relations, where you have to deal with humans, where you need to have empathy, where you need doing business development, okay? All these things a computer cannot do and will not be able to do in the next 20 to 30 years, okay? So that's where you see, yes, Some tasks will be taken over by computers, but a lot of other tasks will not. And this is just a diagram where I said very clearly, the one that are prone to be replaced by computers, the jobs or tasks, are the tellers, the cashiers, the factory workers, even harvesters, assembly line inspectors. That are indeed jobs or tasks that will be automated. The ones that will hardly be automated are criminal defense attorneys, psychiatrists, communication directors, CEOs of companies, talent strategists, because it requires so much versatility and flexibility and creativity, imagination, something, a characteristic a computer does not have. Okay, and so I don't see a lot of things happening there. The ones on medium risk are indeed the jobs I have prepared that I've mentioned here. But then again, I don't think that will be replaced in 2050 either. But I can foresee that some computers and artificial intelligence may be able to do some of those jobs in the future, including taxi drivers. If indeed autonomous driving becomes a reality, which I believe will be, then yes. Will it be by 2050? I don't know. I think we will have definitely autonomous driving, but it will not be fully implemented as we would like to. So it'll take a little bit longer because we need to adapt our structure, regulations, and so on and so forth. And that brings me to my last slides, which is really about collaboration between computers. It's obvious when there's a lot of data available, like in here, and it's a familiar problem like credit scoring, then yes, computers can do a great job. Why? Because in credit scoring, in financial world, you only need, and that's proven scientifically, you need about 4 or 5, 3 variables: income statement, where you live, how you live, and maybe your educational background, okay? And that determines with a high accuracy in probability calculation, at least, whether somebody will pay back their loan or not. Now, if you know those 4 variables, you can automate that. You put into a computer, it will do, gender neutral, I presume, it will do a great job, better than humans that may be emotional. Seeing a handsome or beautiful woman in front of may influence the way, or an older or a young person, that may influence your job in a biased manner, okay? So computers doing a great job here. Where humans are much better as computers is in complex negotiations. That's something a computer will not be able to do, or intelligent briefing. The context is crucial, all right? Where you see the collaboration between humans and computers is where you have repetitive issues like medical diagnosis, where, as I said earlier, computer will be able to detect patterns and predict, therefore, particular diseases that we humans may not easily see, but we still need the expert to deal with the interpretation of what the computer is saying or predicting. And so that's where collaboration is definitely very powerful. Or in the example of flying airplanes, where you know that the risk is basically in the takeoff and the landing, but even that could be done quite automatically under normal, stable conditions by a computer. Where the humans are still crucial is where you need that extreme flexibility and extreme weather, where computers make mistakes, okay? And again, you see there, computers and humans can collaborate quite well, depending whether you have indeed a unique task or a repetitive task, and whether you have high data, big data available or not. And that brings me then to the conclusion, where I'm saying that if we talk about artificial intelligence and the future of data that have and will have an impact on business, obviously, and I have a couple of slides which I've hidden, which I'm not showing you yet, is if you're looking to business, we're looking more and more to platforms. Platforms like Amazon, there's so many, in fact, Apple, Google, you just name it, and ecosystems. That will be where you see a lot of business opportunities where computers will do an effective and efficient job. But at the end of the day, it's about turning products into a service and even possibly into an experience. And some in some instances, the computer may automate. In some instances, the computer may able to augment the human decision making. Okay, but at the end of the day, because we're still talking about narrow artificial intelligence, not the general artificial intelligence where computers are as intelligent as people, which I don't see happening yet. With the narrow artificial intelligence applications, we need what I call algorithmic thinking, algorithmic leadership, where you have learning through Bayesian statistical thinking, and at the same time also wise decision making. And what I mean by wise decision making, it also is important to take normative issues. As I said, and that, I think that's the most important, I think, of this short lecture, is that humans have the ability not only to predict. Computers can do a better job if they have big data. But what computers cannot do is we humans can creatively imagine a better world, literally and figuratively, meaning we will be able to innovate because we can think about a model that is different of today, and that's something that we can aspire to, which is a normative statement, okay? And that is something a computer cannot do. A computer does only pattern recognition based on big data and making associations, okay? And it's almost done, quote unquote, subconsciously. Whereas we, through our unconscious, intuitive, and conscious modeling, okay, we are able to also make discoveries and through causal thinking. But we have one great additional tool, which is our imagination and foreseeing a very different environment that is worth striving for. And I think that is where computers will never match us. And so I think to round off, my point is, yes, we will have the machina sapiens, the machine intelligence, if you like, the artificial intelligence, but it will not match the intelligence of the Homo sapiens. We may have a lot of criticism. And so briefly, I see a lot of opportunities in business. In terms of society, we should ask ourselves, though, what kind of society do we aspire? And how far are we going to allow to be driven by data and being dictated by data? That's a question we should answer. And the government, the third, should indeed put the boundaries and regulate and having the standards in which business can thrive and not go beyond. So politicians at least should try to think about the fact, okay, where does this lead us, okay? And we should think also about what kind of political system do we want related to data. Because if you're going to use data, if government going to do data, do we have an input legitimacy or an output legitimacy? Meaning, are we going to have procedures and processes like we have in a democratic system, or like in China where you have an output legitimacy, as long as the output is beneficial to people, fine, the world will go on and the more autocratic system will be possibly effective. But is that what we aspire as human beings? So these are questions that are also going to be important when we talk about the data. So basically, data will have an influence on business, obviously. It will have an influence on society and government. And central to all that, the three major parts is education, where education should understand the Homo sapiens and the machina sapiens, both the hard science and the human science, the social sciences of what is that we want and what kind of society do we want to live in. I'm going to keep it there. My time is up for the first part, so I'm going to let it up to you, Ibutilma, for the Q&A.
Yes, Pat. Thank you so much for the explanation. I think we're ready to open up questions. There are already a couple of questions here. Some of it already been discussed briefly, but a couple need, I think, probably more, they would like to know more in depth on that. So I'm going to open the first term. There are 3 questions within this term. It is, the first question came from Fabian Haidar. Would you like to ask the question directly? Fabian, are you there? Okay, well, if not, I just read out loud the question for you, Pa Peter. The question is, I think it's already briefly mentioned, but it is, how much data do you need to make initial predictions? So it's just basically just the brief idea on how much.
Okay, all right. Do you see me, or is we can put the slides off, I presume?
I think, yeah, we can see you still, and if you want to, and the slide is still here.
Yeah, the slides I can take them off. No worries. Sure. Okay. I'm not seeing yet how to put it off. I guess somebody can do that for me.
Can the host? Would you like to?
Okay. Yeah, fine.
Yeah.
All right. So basically, the question is, how much big data do we need? Well, first of all, let me just give you an idea. The first slide I was showing was that kind of layer where you had an image and the computer was trying to recognize that image by putting a name on it, right? Yeah. Face recognition, like we have on our phones today. Phone, the new Apples do that. They basically look at you and they can recognize, oh yeah, it's you, you're allowed in. Okay, that's face recognition. Now the way they do that is by having particular layers. And in this particular case, it is not 10 or 1,000 or 10,000. These are millions of data that you need in order to train the algorithm to be able to recognize you. Now, once you've done it, then it becomes easier. So when you talk about big data for artificial intelligence, which is very different from the way a baby learns, you need really big data. We talk about millions of data, okay? And that was indeed something that was a breakthrough in 2013, whereby this kind of algorithm, convolutional networks called, was able, through backpropagation, which is basically a statistical term, by looking at through the different layers, a pattern, and was able to, looking at something, recognizing it by training, that's why we call it supervised learning, because the data needs to be trained to put into the algorithm. And once that is done, then the computer can go fast. But to do that, you need huge data.
Yeah.
Does that answer the question?
I think Fabri is now unmuted. Fabri, would you like to comment on that? Hello? He is actually permitted to talk. Oh, yeah, sure. Please, Fabri.
Yeah, okay. Hello, Peter.
Hi.
Yeah, my name is Fabrian from Notflux. Notflux is a vision AI company from Indonesia. Yeah, thank you for the answer, because I need to confirm because we have the product like the vision. So yeah, we need the data set to train our machine. So yeah, I need to like the confirm it how many the data to predict the
but one thing one thing though, when I said millions of data, that's still true, but today you have algorithms that you can almost buy, and I have companies I've seen, and some people, a friend of mine, his company RoboVision, they have an algorithm, and so they can do this recognition. And one of the things they did, because they have the algorithm, it's been trained already, they can do, let's say, looking at tulips in the Netherlands, a company using tulips that they need to recognize whether it's nice tulips to be sold or not. That system can do that automatically because it's been trained. Your question was, how much data do you need to train an algorithm from scratch? That's millions. Once you have the algorithm, it's amazing how fast it can turn, just for that process though, recognition. It can recognize dogs, if you're a dog trainer, I don't know, or it can, for tulps, like if you are in that kind of business. So once you have the algorithm, it can do quite a lot of things for that particular task.
Okay. Okay, understood.
All right.
Thank you, Peter.
Welcome.
Perfect. Okay, so the second one will be from, let's see, there are a couple of questions here. I'll take one from, wait, excuse me, sorry. I'll take one from Yesri Rahayu. Hello, I'm Rahayu from Indonesia. I would like to ask about the validity of data from big data source. Can we use it as official source of data? So I think what she meant might be something that is commercially published. So then whether or not it is, it is valid for further analysis. I hope that explains. I mean, that's...
this is a question that is not easy to answer, and because there are many layers, if you like, in that question. Let me just say this. First of all, and here my governance attitude comes in. It's crucial that we have good data governance. That means, so if you talk about data, and let's say you have data, okay, the European Union since May 2017 or 18 has the GDPR, basically the rules that determines that any organization on the territory of the European Union will need to have, if asked, explicit consent from the customer or the client to use the data. So meaning, in order to guarantee privacy of data, the individual needs to give approval if you want to do that in Europe. Now, in China, for example, it's more, quote unquote, liberal in the sense that you don't need that approval because of the CCP, the Communist Party, won't have the data anyway. In the US, it's somewhere in between. So Indonesia, which is the question, can you use data to publish? Well, if somehow you publish it within the territory of Indonesia and you comply to the rules of privacy of Indonesian authorities, I would see no problem. However, if you would bring an application to Europe, on the territory of Europe, you have to make sure that you have explicitly asked the consents of the individual. And what Facebook does and what Google does, they send you almost literally, do you agree that we use the data or something? That's the way they do it, right? Of course, the devil is in the small details as always, but so that's one thing. If you talk about publication for academic reasons, as long as the data are anonymous, as long as you don't have an individual who can object, that's fine. I don't see a problem. Yeah. And that's what artificial intelligence does. They have big data where they're just looking for patterns. So I don't see it as a problem, but if you commercially use it, that's where the tricky part starts. You need to have the consent of people. Now, just have a silly example where the biases comes in. I've been told that Tinder, the dating application, for example, is very biased because the data were used with Caucasian. So you didn't have a lot of data of let's say, Asians or other races in that. And so by definition, the way Tinder algorithm was working, like or not like, was very biased towards Caucasian. Now, that's bias. So if you want to have a good application, you should de-bias that. You should be very aware of that. So it's in your own interest to be very careful with the data. So not only privacy issue, also the biases of data. And that's going to be important for any business application. Is that answering the question?
I think he's unmuted. So, okay, so I hope it answered the question, Rahayu. And next is Aditya Mitra. Aditya Mitra, he has been raising hand. Are you able to unmute and speak, Aditya? Hello, Aditya Mitra. Right, you are permitted to talk. Right, if not, then let's just continue to the third question. It is from our student, Mazida Tun. The question is, she is now watching on YouTube live. The question is, since there will be an increased number of AI usage in the future, how do you think the policy in global and national level should deal with it?
When you say global should deal with it, do you mean a global organization like United Nations, or you're talking about businesses, or okay, let me try to answer. Maybe or you want to refine the question?
Yeah, I think it might be in the context of government.
Okay, let me do both. So basically, yeah. Government, and I would say business. Okay, on government side, because we still live in a society where the nation state has the last word. Okay, that's since 400 years that we have that kind of geopolitical system. Despite the fact that we have institutions like the United Nations and subdivisions within the United Nations and so on and so forth, we have WTO, we have IMF, we have, but the issue is in terms of big data and internet and AI is this. We will have not only internet, we will also have 5G, where our mobile phones will have access in a very easy way. The worry that I have is this, which is indirectly answering the question on the government side. If this trade war between China and US will continue, and the whole issue is about access to data, the whole issue around espionage and whatever you have, right? Cyber threats. And so it's a real, literally, a geopolitical battle for AI supremacy. That's what's going on right now. And I'm quoting Putin of Russia, who said, those that will control AI will control the world. Wow. And it is not untrue. In a way, it is true for the reasons that I've explained to you. So meaning from a government perspective, the US and China are doing anything to secure, let's say, some kind of competitive advantage. Let's put it that way in business terms. And today, if you're looking at today, it is true that AI is still dependent on three things: on the algorithms and the fundamental research, on data, and the underneath infrastructure, which is internet, computers, and all that. In the internet, the last one, infrastructure, China and US are kind of equal. In the first one, algorithms and fundamental research, the US is ahead, not because of the Americans, but because of the top universities in the US, where you have the whole world doing research. On data, China is ahead by the mere numbers. Now, so it's unclear at the moment, in terms of government supremacy, the US is still a little bit ahead of China, but China is catching up briefly. Europe is in between. They are focusing on the whole issue of regulation. Okay. Now, the point is, my worry is if we're not going to be careful, yes, yeah, that I'm not saying that we should go for hyper globalization, which we had in the 90s and led to the 2008 financial crisis. Yeah. But if we're going to fall back in protectionism, yeah, stimulated by this corona thing as well, right? Then my worry is that we're going to have two internets at the end of the day. One is controlled by China and its influence, and one by US, Europe, let's say, but I would say US. And that's a worry. So in that sense, yes, I'm a proponent of trying to solve the issue on a global level, okay? As we should do with any big global challenge, whether it's climate change or one of the coronas we have facing today. So we need kind of supranational organizations, but they're not very functional, unfortunately. They're not very effective. So that's an issue. On the business side, which I'm more familiar with, is a very simple one. If you look to Uber versus Airbnb, both using AI, okay? Airbnb, it's the network of Airbnb is much more powerful to defend, okay? Uber needs to battle each city, city per city. If you look to Uber, it is very powerful and competing with Lyft in the US.
Yeah.
It's reasonably okay in Europe, but it has competitors. In Asia, they're gone. Gojek, Grab, Didi. So basically each context has their own, because the application is not that difficult. It's a question of how do you contextualize to the needs of the people and who is the first, of course. So the question is, Uber's business model is a difficult one, because although it's a great application, they still pull in money to subsidize both the drivers as well as the customers. And just give you an idea here, every 9 months, they have to reinvent the whole, let's say, the amount of drivers, because on a monthly basis, apparently 12% is leaving Uber to move to another provider. That means they have to really pay to keep the people with them. So the competition is incredible. Yeah. Whereas with Airbnb, it's a very different, so meaning this is more the business side, which is not the topic of today, but that was more what I'm interested in. As a governance guy, I'm looking to the future. So I need to know what are we going to do with investing. So AI use is definitely going to be part of digitization, and we should embrace it, but in a very smart manner. So that's basically my point. If you're looking at the political issue, the government issue, as I said, I'm a little bit worried. I'm worried at the global level. I'm also worried about countries that do not invest enough in education. Because if we don't do that, if we don't invest in how to learn and learn more effectively and efficiently and in a broad manner, we're going to lose, because that's the only thing we have to compete with AI, right? And so these are the issues that are a big concern to me. So I'm not sure whether I fully answered it, but so my 2 points are: government, yes, it's an issue, we should have a global level, but with the whole trade issue, difficult. Business is quite clear. Platforms, ecosystem is going to be the future, and that may be global, because you can scale up with applications like AI, but there are limitations, whether it's cultural or geographical or whatever needs space that are sometimes different and complicate the matter for an organization. Same with Alibaba versus Amazon, okay? So yes, we have the same thing in Indonesia, right?
Just to give a closing to, with the first terms of Q&A, I'd like to just give you a quick question, Pa. So when you say about the government and also the policy around AI and also data management, would you agree upon the assumption that any countries mastering AI would actually have the more national sovereignty?
When you say every nation, remember who is involved at the moment in AI. That basically are universities, research centers, and businesses. The government has, in my opinion, a regulatory role to put standards and enforce the rule of law. So that's what the government does. Now, indirectly or directly, they're also involved if they subsidize universities, obviously. Yeah. Okay, that's where they have a direct impact. So if they can invest, provide funds, budgets for education, then yes. Then I fully agree, that's where the influence is. But I don't, and of course they use AI, but the research will be done, I repeat, by universities and by businesses, because they know how to use resources in the most effective and efficient manner, not necessarily politicians. I wouldn't trust politicians with that. But we need politicians to put, because they are reflecting the aspirations of civil society, at least theoretically. And so they're the ones who should take decisions on behalf of, in a legitimate manner. That's the function of a government.
All right. Well, thank you. And before we, I'll let you rest for 1 or 2 minutes, but
That's okay.
just before we go on to the next term question and answer, I'd like to give you a couple of information for all those of you who's now here in Zoom and also in YouTube. Thank you so much for being here, and we would like to give you a heads up on our upcoming event. On the 13th of May, we will have the mayor of Bogor City, Bapak Bima Arya, which is currently a survivor of COVID-19, at 9 to 10. And the same day, Wednesday, the 13th of May, there will be also a public lecture on energy access for building resilient communities, mobilizing investment in decentralized renewable energy at 2 to 4. Will be done by Muhammad Eri Wijaya. This is our lecturer in SCPP. So make sure you follow our Instagram and also our social media platform and LinkedIn and others at SGPP Indonesia. All right. So ready for the second term? The second term, I'll take the first question from the Q&A space. This is Safir. I'm going to just, you can see it as well in Q&A, but I just read it out loud so that people from YouTube Live can also hear. Good afternoon, distinguished Mr. Paul Verhezen. My name is Safir and I am a bachelor student from Statistic University of Indonesia. I'm really excited to watch and learn your informative presentation as it is really connected with I'm currently doing every day. Related with your topic, I'm also learning and collecting, predicting, produce information and system through machine learning. But I see another view from the reality of Indonesia. I think as developing countries, we are not that ready for Industrial Revolution 4.0, that using data for doing something more efficient. Many companies do not realize that data is important, that they should prepare and invest for their future business. So as policy strategy, what would you do to rise the culture of using data, or at least data realized, so we as developing country will not be the victim of technology?
Wow. Okay.
Interesting.
Well, first of all, when we talk about data, I want to re-emphasize this, that data and raw data particularly are only useful when we can find meaning or create meaning, which means, and that's what intelligence does, whether that's in vitro or through neural networks, circuits in our brain, meaning whether it's artificial or whether it's literally our brain, what they do is they turn the data into information that's useful and into actionable knowledge. So that's important, because data in itself are just data, and we have an abundance, and statistically there's a lot of noise in data. That's why it is important to find certain patterns or if you're a scientist, to see a causal relationship, okay, between one and another phenomenon. Okay. Now, the question here is whether so-called emerging countries or developing countries are going to stay behind. Now, I'm not thinking in terms of developed versus developing countries. I'm looking at more from digital natives versus people who are staying behind. Because let's not forget, we have a Gojek in Indonesia, we have a Grab, we have a Tokopedia, we have in China as many unicorns as we do have in the US. And so for me, the GDP per capita is not necessarily a good predictor for indicating whether a country will be investing in AI and succeeding in AI. I'm seeing more that you have cities and pockets of interesting teams of bright young people coming up, meaning scientists and entrepreneurs together, that are bringing these ideas around AI into reality. And that can be in Indonesia, it can be in China, it can be anywhere in the world. So I'm not so worried about that question. My worry is really about, one, a generational conflict between older people who are not going to be able to follow this,
Right.
And I'm thinking now literally about Corona, where we have digital now. All
Yes.
people are learning fast, but only to a certain limit.
Yes.
Okay. And so people who have the knowledge, who have studied data science, who understand engineering, and those who have the creative mind, those two extreme, let's say, they're going to strive in the future. But everybody who is still investing in jobs that are going to be automated, they will have problems because they will be replaced by AI. You see, tasks, not jobs. Because you had cashiers 20, 30 years in the bank. These cashiers have been replaced by ATM machines and wireless money, the wallet on your mobile phone. But you still have people working in a bank but doing other jobs. So it frees up time to do other things.
Yeah.
Now, coming back to the question, I think Indonesia, yes, needs to invest. And that means they need to have pockets of excellence in the universities that we know of.
Kakak Hujan Kak, udah nanti.
Any. So that's something that I want to emphasize. So I'm not worried about a country as such. I'm worried about within countries, whether we do invest enough, whether it's business or research in AI, in neuroscience, whatever it is. And you don't have to reinvent the wheel. So I would suggest the government to decide particular areas like agriculture, for example, where or biogenetics, where artificial intelligence can help. Areas which are relevant for the country. And we hopefully will be still collaborate across national borders to import certain, let's say, achievements done by other research centers. So there's a lot. So my emphasis is really about collaboration. Collaboration between humans and machines, but also across borders, between universities, across. I'm a big nationalist, but a nationalist who invests in learning and will learn from other people in the world. Not a nationalist who will close the borders and be protective and thinking I'm the best because I'm in whatever race. That is for me dangerous. So if Indonesia is willing to open up and learn from others and contribute to the whole process, then I don't see a problem. The problem will be that those who have not been educated in certain areas, they may not thrive as others. So the inequality may increase. That is the worry I have within the country, not between countries. I think Indonesia will catch up, and so does already China, but I'm seeing a lot of inequality growing within those countries, including in the West.
Right. Well, thank you. Since we only have, I think 15 minutes left, and oh no, we have half an hour. Yeah, okay. We have so many questions, Pak, very exciting questions. And one of it is from Jacob Indiartia, one of my colleagues in SGPP. The question is, far before today's global pandemic, Bill Gates in TED Forum said that health system globally cannot take care or tackle if there are global pandemic. Today, what he said is proven. So how far would you think by using big data, we could prevent or tackle another pandemic in the future?
Okay, two issues here. When I watched an interview with Nasib Taleb, who quipped the notion of the black swans, which is a risk notion. And he said, the coronavirus is not something that was completely unexpected. It's not a black swan. It's most likely a gray swan, meaning it's something that we could foresee. What I'm really saying is, you didn't need big data to have preparations done for something like the corona. We already had SARS, we had Ebola in Africa. We knew and we know the danger of this kind of pandemics.
Right.
We were not ready, the world wasn't ready because we were not prepared, because we didn't think it would affect the whole world at the same time. And even in Europe, when in Wuhan the thing was starting, I mean, nobody did think it would just fly over, but because of the global world and the virus doesn't have borders, yes, this is happening. So I think to determine the probability of having a pandemic, That is not where big data are useful. What big data can be useful for is crashing numbers of genetic DNA structures that hopefully will lead to a vaccine. That's where AI can be useful. So going to what's the probability that this combination will help us to find a vaccine, that's already happening in the pharma industry. So AI can be useful there to somehow help to speed up, let's say, that process, but not in the phenomena of a pandemic as such. We know it. It was going to happen. We didn't know when,
No.
and we were unfortunately not prepared, which is very bad risk management on behalf of all governments.
Okay, well, I hope it answered the question. And the third one will be from Dia Indrapati, another student from STPP. Though Indonesia has a big population in social media users, do you think Indonesia can be a prominent player in this big data field? Can this be a newfound Indonesia assets that can be maximized?
Okay, I make a big difference, and that's between the users and the suppliers. Okay, as I said earlier, my three domains are the government, the civil society, where the users are, and the businesses that create. When you're asking, okay, indeed, Indonesia, I think is one of the highest users of WhatsApp and Instagram and Facebook on the planet. Okay, it's amazing how many Indonesians are on Facebook. But unfortunately, Facebook is not Indonesian; it's American. But again, we have something like Gojek. We have some unicorns in Indonesia, Tokopedia, and just name a few there, that are using AI in a very smart manner. And so for me, again, it is not just the user, because I'm almost sure that's inevitable. The trend is data, and the way we're going to use data on our mobile phones, that's the trend that's going to disrupt businesses and any business. And so we're going to be able to use that. And I think we're doing that. But the question is more, who controls those applications and pay taxes, revenues, create revenues and pay taxes on these revenues? That unfortunately is still most of the time the US again, China, and to an extent Europe. Again, having said that, we have fortunately a couple of unicorns in Indonesia and other countries that are embracing AI, and that's the good point. So for me, it's not because you're using it, but at least there's a kind of, what should I say, a proficiency of usage of AI. But that doesn't guarantee, so understanding like me, I understand how a system works. That doesn't make me an expert on data system and algorithms, which is basically what's behind the black box. So having the system is one thing, and using that, okay, that's good. But what's really important is how you're going to use that in applications and how to build the backend for these kind of applications. And that is something Indonesia really need to step up. That is true. Fortunately, there are people who are doing it. There are some good institutions or teaching courses in it. But I think Indonesia can do a better job still and improve it. But so many other countries, Indonesia is not by itself. And remember, it's, again, even in the US, it's only a small pocket of top universities and Boston, Silicon Valley, which are really thriving in that kind of area. That doesn't mean that all Americans are smart for developing this kind of systems, right?
Okay, well, thank you for that, Pat. And the next one will be from Valley Ismail. It is still quite related to when you say about the unicorn and also their datas. This is a question on the breach of datas that just recently happening on the news. So let me just read it to you. This past couple of days, Indonesia has been hit by the news on data breach in several e-commerce in Indonesia. Most of the people would be worried only about whether do they lose financially or not. In other words, we actually can't measure the harm or damage for the victim of the breach. Could you please share, could you elaborate more on why and on what we should be more cautious more than just losing our money or privacy to Google or Facebook?
Well, these are two important issues already.
Yeah.
Losing money and losing privacy, those are two crucial issues, isn't it? Now, speaking of data breach, I think, and that's exactly what we have to do within corporate governance, is looking at the dangers of risks, and cyber breaching and cyber threats is one of those ugly parts of artificial intelligence. Now, there are two issues here. One is that if you're looking at data breaches, people think that it is often because of the weak information technology behind that data can be stolen. Surveys have shown worldwide, including Indonesia, that data breaches are often, well, 70% of data breaches is because of the humans, which means weak authentication processes, passwords, and not being careful with phishing through emails and so on and so forth. And 30% is indeed because of weak antivirus systems and firewalls and whatever you have. But the majority, the weak spot in the chain there is the human. People, employees who are not careful in the way that data are transferred within the organization, or worse, beyond the border of the organization. So in terms of that, and they're not by themselves. I mean, even universities, hackers are very smart people and will always find ways to get in. That's why Google is giving $1 million for each hacker that can get into the system, because the more you are able to think like a hacker, the better you will be able to protect yourself against them. But I repeat, most of the theft by data is because the negligence, or in fact, negligence is one, or incompetence, or not being conscious of how you share data and how you keep the files open for people just to take it away from you. So just, okay, give you an example where artificial intelligence is doing smart things here. I have a couple of banks, and one of the banks using artificial intelligence, for example, I'm often in Singapore, Indonesia, and I'm not traveling that much to the US anymore, or Latin America. So if, for example, my credit card would notice that there is a credit, my credit card is used in the US or in Latin America, the AI of the particular bank that I'm thinking of would even call me because there is an anomaly in my pattern of data usage that is not conform to what it expects to do. And so artificial intelligence is extremely good now, today, the last 4 years at least, for fraud detection and cyber crimes on banking, okay? And they will call me, say, Mr. Verhezen, did you indeed use it? So you see, that's where AI can be very useful. But I repeat, breaches, and the more we're going to be interconnected. So my real worry is in 30 years from now, back to the title, my worry is not so much that there will be data breaches, that always will be. We have to just keep up with the hackers and do a better job. My worry is if we're going to be connected, whether industrial Internet of Things or Internet of Things, and we have all 5G phones, everything is connected, including our cars, autonomous driving, and whatever you have. If somebody can get hold of the infrastructure and control or disrupt it, that's going to be profound on the way our society is functioning. Even just right now, if somehow internet falls out, suppose, we are, what are we going to do? And so these are issues that we have to think of. So the short term and long term, yes, it is true, data theft is an issue. it's a big issue in governance and in any business. We should be aware of it. We should help. But a lot has to do with procedures within organizations. Humans that are not doing the right thing or too negligent in the way that data are exchanged. And second part is the black box. That's another issue. I believe there is a mistrust of people to AI, and rightfully so, because we don't know how the machine comes up, input, output. We don't know how it works. And because it's very deep learning complexity of the machine, only a few did make it because it's so-called competitive advantage. And even the scientists themselves doesn't know anymore how it works because it's just an algorithm that functions. So we need, like in accounting, we have auditors. What we may suggest is we should have algorithmists, meaning people who understand algorithms and have a verification of whether the system does the right thing and whether indeed there are weaknesses in the system, whatever it is. So that are possible functions that do not exist yet, but for young people who would be interested in that, that's definitely something that I see as a possibility.
Right, Pat, thank you so much. And the next one will be from Siti Maria, and she would ask the question directly, please.
Okay, thank you very much. I am Siti Maria from Polytechnic Scouting Ilmu Statistik, STS Polytechnic of Statistics in Indonesia. If we talk about big data, I just see from the statistical point of view. In statistical point of view, a representation of population, when we infer the population, when we want to get insight from population, it's a very crucial. I mean that when we select the samples to understand the population behavior, we have to measure, we have to control the probability how one sample can representation how many people in the populations. And my question is, does big data always guarantee good representation of the populations? For example, if we talk about social media, the social media data, we can easily harvest the big data, right? Because the data come extremely every second, we can get the data. Every second, all people registered in social media can make a status or can make a timeline. But how this data can give good insight, because the participation in the social media is based on the willingness. I mean that not all people is included in the social media activity. And for example, another example is how we can determine the traffic in the road if we determine the traffic from the GPS, but not all people use the GPS while driving. So my question is, does the big data always guarantee good representation of the population? So how we can handle that the insight can understand the real behavior of the population? I think that's all. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Siti. Let me try to answer this as brief as I can and as insightful as I can. When you talk about data population, and since you're a statistician, you know you need to have a so-called random sample that represents the population. That's what statisticians do, and you need therefore big enough to have a representation of the population. I think what statisticians are doing is finding correlations. Now, through hypothetical thinking, somehow a good scientist would have implicitly a model which looks at the causal relationship. And statistics does the correlation, and therefore, if the model would work, you can assume that there is potentially indeed a causal relationship. Now that artificial intelligence using big data, seeking patterns, is nothing but correlation. It doesn't think in models. And that's the biggest weakness of AI. Now then the second question you ask, is big data having the proper population or having the right presentation? The answer to that is yes and no. If you have for a specific job enough data to recognize, and sorry, you have enough data that are relevant and you have trained the algorithm in such a way it can do the job, then yes, like having a picture and you have billions of data that it helps them to learn how to get the output, namely this person is Miss Linda, okay? Well, that is indeed what algorithms do, but it doesn't understand that the picture is Linda in real life, it just sees the correlation. So big data are as biased as the data that you have. So if the data indeed, as I gave the example with the dating service, if you have data, well, let me do this. Recognition of faces, for example, China is very good in that. They have some companies, and because of big data, they are very good in recognizing faces. If you would literally use the data of the Chinese and try to do that in Europe or US, it may not work that well, because there you have still Caucasians that are not looking like the Chinese. And so the population should include, if it's applicable or to be applied in a European or a Western context, Caucasian. Or in Indonesia, you should have indeed that kind of population which differs from a particular. So the big data is only as useful as it's in statistics. You have a lot of noise that will be cleared out by averaging, as you know from statistics. So the issue in big data is less of an issue than what we do in science, where you have a much smaller population or random variables that you choose for doing hypothetical thinking or statistical, hypothesis testing. So there are two different things. And by the way, babies apparently are born with that kind of statistical innate probability modeling in their brains. I can show you almost. The neurons are literally there. It's not empty when you're born. You have basically highways in your brain ready to be used. And it's flexible for the first year of a baby until the first year, because then it will be used. So when a baby is born, okay, the data the baby will receive, whether it's in Chinese Mandarin or in French or in English or Indonesia, that doesn't matter for any baby. The baby will immediately grab it. And that's why if you learn 2-3 languages when you're young, it will help you to keep that flexibility. But the baby is neutral. It just has that ability. And so it does it with small data. It doesn't need a lot of big data. It's incredible how good babies are in learning. And that's where, I repeat, babies and humans are definitely superior in learning to our AI. And that's why your question is fair and relevant. Yes, big data are important because that's where the averaging will count. But if you, even in the big data, you have millions or billions of data of Chinese and you want to apply it in a Western context, you still will not have the exact right output that you desire. You need to have the system having this kind of data involved as well. And for statistical thinking, you know yourself, it's a question of having randomly chosen data, but the scientist usually has a model. That's the big difference. Data, the scientist thinks causally. A human thinks causally. A system thinks only in terms of correlations. It sees patterns. It doesn't understand. It's completely dumb. Even autonomous driving is nothing but Bayesian statistics, a priori data that becomes a posteriori through a feedback system becomes a priori again, and it determines where there's an object in front of the car, and that's how it drives. It has thousands of data per second. That's how it predicts literally how the autonomous car will go ahead. And it's working fine on big streets. That's where cars already are functioning. And so that's how it works. Humans do a little bit more, much more, in fact, than AI ever can at this moment. I hope that gives you a little bit of an answer. Oh, the GPS traffic, yes. Well, I'm not sure what you mean by that is, if everybody's using the same GPS, then then it will add to the traffic. Do you know that? Now, I think in the future, in 30 years from now, every car will have a GPS. It will be automatic. So it's not a question of whether some are using it or not. That's today the case. But today, yeah, especially in Jakarta, that's another issue. The way there's traffic, there is a lot of knowledge already how to ease traffic. But that's not necessarily to do with AI. AI will be able to contribute, but I'm thinking more about fundamental different use of transportation, where you have drones that will able to transport people, you have autonomous drive. So the fact that you have autonomous systems where errors are less, as with humans, you will have a more effective, efficient system in queuing, for example, than you have today to start with. But we will need to think fundamentally about how we want to transport ourselves in a very different manner than today. But that's a different story altogether. So I hope that that's answering to an extent your question.
Right, is Siti still there?
Yes, yes, and thank you.
All right, thank you for your question. And the next question, I'm going to take it from the YouTube comments. It's from Bernardus Prabowo. The question is, hi, what are the steps that we governments around the world should take as we're facing this AI era? Especially when we all know that so many people will lose their jobs as one of an impact of it. And for example, can we start from changing the educational curriculum as earlier as possible, like starting from elementary stage? I think the second statement has not been discussed yet. Your view
education,
on
the education, you mean?
the education, yeah, education curriculum earlier as possible, like elementary stage.
Okay, two things. As I said, I don't believe that in 2050 computers will take over from humans. We will still be in control. Number two, yes, it is true that in 2050 some jobs or tasks will be automated and therefore replaced by computers that are smarter and faster than us. Smarter meaning faster. They're not smart in terms of understanding. Okay. But as if you look back, when Mr. Henry Ford made cars, nobody wanted cars, right? But people and organizations are extremely resilient. You see that even now with coronavirus. You see that people are reacting and will adapt. We are extremely adaptable beings, and that's where we have proven from an evolutionary perspective how good we are, and the same in business. And the reality is that as human beings, we are born, we mature, and we die. And that's not a bad thing. It also allows newcomers to have their chance. So I would say losing jobs, yes, there will be certain jobs that will be lost, but a lot of new opportunities will arrive that we don't even see yet. We have a clue, and that's why it is the function of government and business to think ahead, which I call them governance and risk management, to look at trends and see whether it's in health. So not just too generic, I'm talking about industry per industry, like any government official who's responsible for a certain area, unless of course you're the president and you have to do all. But you have experts in each area that has to look for where is it that a particular trend will have a profound impact, like in health, like education, and so all these issues are going to be crucial. And I think, yes, we need to be prepared. And since you asked me explicitly education, I think Indonesia and other countries, including the country where I'm staying at the moment for a few weeks now, I hope I can return soon back to your beloved country, is indeed we need to look at how machine and humans learn and how we become more intelligent. And so for me, we need to understand neuroscience, we need to understand engineering, we need to understand artificial intelligence. And business does do that. They bring it, they are doing this, but education needs to adapt, yes. And we need to understand philosophy, we need to understand sociology, all psychology, all those issues are important because we are social beings. Again, artificial intelligence doesn't relate to each other. We are social animals almost to say, and that makes us also special. We need to communicate. That's where language is so crucial. We need to learn languages. And so for me, yes, education is the crucial point for any government, and that would be a focus for any government who is serious about the future of their citizens. Any government who is not doing that is not doing their proper job. So yes, obviously, and not because I'm at the moment at a university, but because I believe that's the only way that we will remain relevant. And that's allowing us to find meaning, because that is ultimately what humans do. We need to find meaning. And meaning not just in a religious or philosophical manner, but finding meaning in any data that we can turn into information and knowledge. And that will lead to applications that are making our life easier, faster if necessary, or slower, and that we have lots of more time to do other things that are interesting. So that's basically the basis, yes. So education is, if we're not educated, if we don't know what this is about, we will be lost. We will have no chance to compete or to find or to create. Because creation and being innovative requires a certain knowledge, isn't it? So yes, obviously, I'm a big proponent of education and the crucial importance of it for any human being.
Right. Okay, well, thank you, Baba. And the next one will be from Ida Ayu Prasasti Dewi Sasti. He's one of the alumni. She's one of the alumni in SGPP. The question is about, will it possible to use AI to do medical services and replace jobs such as doctor during pandemic? I love the question. It will probably,
say it again. Will AI replace doctors? Is that the question?
Yes, during pandemic. It will probably lower the risk of virus transmission to the medical workers. If it's possible, how long do you think it will take time? Will it need such a proper big data, since not all countries have done proper management of their big data? Thank you, Mr. Verhezen.
Okay, so thank you for the question. It's an interesting one. Today, you have already robots, intelligent robots in Japan, in hotels, lobbies, that welcome people. Because we will have, in the next 10, 15, 20 years, and Google's already working on that, we will have a device we put in our ears that will translate automatically, which you can do with Google Translate already, right? We will do that in a device where you don't have to have a translator, it will do it automatically. They're investing today already in how robots can mimic emotions. So back to my receptionist at a hotel in Japan, it's already there. Having said that, I don't see any problem, even right now, to bring that robot to checking for corona testing. Instead of having people doing the testing, whether you're positive or negative, a robot can do that perfectly right now. So you don't need to reinvent the wheel. The robots exist, the algorithms exist already for certain behavior, but it will be limited. A robot is not able yet to do a full diagnostic automatically from A to Z. You still need a medical doctor who will tell you linguistically in an empathic manner, meaning with empathy, what is going on. One of the problems is, it's called the Turing test, which is the one that determines, it's not necessarily among scientists the best test at the moment anymore, but the Turing test means that once you communicate with a computer and you don't know it's a computer, the computer would have succeeded in fooling you, thinking it was a human. That's a time that a computer is almost as intelligent as a human being. Now we have Alexa, we have Siri, we have all this kind of personal assistants already, right? We talk to them. Now you try a computer to read between the lines. It cannot yet, because that requires contextual understanding. A computer cannot do that. And I don't see that happening in the next 10 years, because it's a complete modeling thinking. Or making a joke with a computer. Even if you put billions of jokes in the computer, it may start to understand a little bit if the joke is similar, but once you do something off, computers do not follow. Now, why do I mention that is because as long as you have certain procedures for corona testing, the computer will be able to do that. However, if you have a patient who wants all the questions to be answered, a computer may only do so much. It may not do everything possible. So yes, for certain procedures, the computer will automatically be able to help to reduce the danger of being affected by corona, for example. But okay, pragmatically speaking, I don't think it's worth the investment, because I think, I touch wood, that in the next 1 year we have a vaccine. So that's a smaller investment in that sense, if you like, than having in all hospitals in the world robots now. We may need robots, not because for AI, but because there's no people who can do it, or we don't have enough people to be serving, especially in the developed world, like in Japan, where aging is an issue, right? Where you don't have young people enough for, so I think AI will be able to do a lot of automation, but be wise. Not everything should be done by robots. And in this case, for corona, I just hope that science will be faster in having a vaccine than having robots being trained to do a particular job.
Great. Okay, thank you for bringing that up. I think we only have room for another 1 or 2 questions. There's one good question from Ferro Tampu, one of the our attendees in Zoom webinar. First is, will human chip that has been approved by RFID will be considered as privacy intrudes in the future? And the second one, how a human chip may shape sales, marketing, or network. Your review about human.
Well, we already have human chips right now. Peacemakers by Medtronic, US company, and others. We already have, in a way, kind of devices put in our body that are regulating our organs. We have ear plugs, whatever it is. So we already have so I see indeed in 2050, most likely a kind of the start of cyborgs, meaning we will have chips implanted to help us. Now, there are 2 questions. From a business perspective, obviously that's where an opportunity is. People who can make the chips and put applications and do things, obviously they can see. But here the government and society plays a role. It's important that, one, the government puts the boundaries for what is acceptable and what's not acceptable. And that's to do with ethics. That's to do with what is normatively, what kind of society do we aspire, okay? Like genetic manipulation of babies, which is possible, and happened with one example in China, but unfortunately a doctor crossed a couple of borders or lines and boundaries, and that was not accepted by the academic community. From a business perspective, yes, they always will look for business and opportunities. It's up to the government and society to put the boundaries and the regulation and the standards. And that's up, and hopefully that will be on a global level, but at the moment it's definitely on a national level. But big countries have, of course, an impact on other countries. If certain regulations are imposed, then companies will go for the best and the highest standards. Because if it follows and complies with the highest standards, it will be no problem to have it somehow in other countries accepted as well, isn't it? I think that's the issue. But yes, there's a future. The question is, how far do you want to go? And I don't have the answer for that, because that's to be determined by the community. What is it that we want? I don't see we can stop science and the progress of science. The question is, what are the limitations? There's a whole debate. Again, we had the same in biology. The genetic manipulation of crop, okay, where Monsanto became famous for. In the US, it's very highly accepted, that kind of business behavior, let's say. In Europe, for whatever emotional reason, we're very much against it. And so same with chips that are implanted in the human being for whether philosophical or religious reasons, we may not want that. But other people say, yeah, no problem. It will augment my decision power, and I therefore will be able to make better decisions.
Okay, well, I hope it answers your questions, Vero. And just another two. There's questions from Dr. Mulyaningrum. Big data is a valued asset, including personal data. How can we protect personal data in order to reduce the risk? I think this is also one of the questions that is that we currently have. Any suggestions or advices?
Okay, this is the typical tension between civil society, the consumer, versus the business, meaning business wants the data from you. Facebook, Google, and that's where, and if you read Zuboff from Harvard, I mean, it's quite scary almost.
Yeah.
They not want just the data from you, they will do anything to, even now the next stage is to manipulate you, to motivate you to behave in a certain manner, because that will help them to convince advertisers that they will even be more effective and efficient. And not to speak even about the fake news, because what is true and what is not true, which is a big issue philosophically. It seems that people do not understand anymore what is true and what is not true. That's a big issue, because if you cannot make that distinction, then whatever we do becomes almost meaningless, because that means exactly we cannot distinguish raw data, get into information and knowledge. If you don't know what is true, information cannot become knowledge, because it's fake. It's not true. Now, I don't say that we have absolute truth. I am a strong believer in, which is a different matter, but in falsification theory, which means you can falsify your data and your theories. That's how science progresses. Okay, so there's no doubt in my mind that that's the way to go. But businesses needs to be put under certain standards, and that's the job of civil society through government regulation to make sure that certain barriers are not crossed. I mean, the whole debate started really with Cambridge Analytica, that got 84 million data from Facebook almost knowingly, which led, of course, to, as we all know, the manipulation of the elections in 2016 in the US. So the point, and now you cannot blame the people, because I can give examples how AI and data can influence people by just framing it differently. And if you know how to do that, you can predict the behavior in terms of voting. You can do that in terms of what you want to purchase. So business will love that, because it will manipulate you. Now, as a consumer, you don't want to lose that autonomy. So that tension is there, and it's the government who needs to basically overcome that tension with wise decision-making, which is proper regulation. And again, it could differ from one country to the other. I just hope that we will be very conscious about the ethical implications of certain applications that are maybe good for business, but definitely not good for quote unquote, for customers. So I'm not a big fan, but that's a personal thing. I'm not a big fan of Facebook for a simple reason. Everybody has an opinion, can just put it on, and people don't know anymore what is correct and not correct. It's amazing what you read on this thing. So I have other things to do. So yeah, for me, but I don't want to fulminate against Facebook. I think it's been useful, but I think we should regulate. And then the next question is, should companies self-regulate? Well, that's what we in business believe, but then again, I've seen the manipulation of our corporations. So maybe we still need a government with some wise decision makers who understand, okay, these are the boundaries for the time being. It can change, that's fine, but let's go step by step.
Right. Thank you, Pa. Thank you for a very concise and clear answer. Okay, so I think we are running out of time, and we would like to also, before we close the seminar, I'd like to also remind you on the 13th of May, we will have another public lecture from the Bapak Bima Arya, Wali Kota Bogor. So make sure you're there, and also make sure that you follow our social media and be wise on social media, as Professor Peter said. All right. Well, let me ask you the last question, Pak. You mentioned a lot about wisdom. You also mentioned about control. You also mentioned about humanity, and also the fact that robots can put into the context of humanity, of human brain, for instance. And also there's a statement about empathy. So my question to you, can perhaps after 30 years in the future, can empathy be replicated? Can machine learning taught empathy?
First, very good question. First, two answers. One, today, in the literature of psychology and neuroscience, it seems that the old traditional view on emotions, including empathy, is going to be falsified. It seems that humans and the emotions of humans are similar to our way we think, meaning we are using models to predict, and it goes in seconds. So within a second, it's driving the way we translate certain things we see and feel and sense with our five senses into what we call emotions. And so there's a lot of literature there that is changing the traditional view that emotions are situated in our limbic brain, whereas the neocortex, our latest evolutionary part, on top of the limbic in the reptile brain, is where the rationality is. And philosophers always have said we should control emotions and we should be rational. The fact is that people are emotional and we love it because we don't want pure robots. So it's the emotional part that makes us human. And exactly, empathy is the way we can feel, and that we are social animals. We need that to survive. So that's one element. So understand that even neuroscience, as we speak, is looking at it from a slightly different perspective than it used to be 20 years ago. That's the first. Two, today, there is already research whereby computers start to feel, meaning they apply the same rule. They put in emotional data or data that are reflecting emotions into the algorithm. They train the algorithm with billions of data to have an understanding, if you smile, that means I'm happy, or the subtleties of a smile. So computers are already learning that. The problem remains, humans think causally. A computer will do the correlation and will still make mistakes because it doesn't understand the context. As long as that is not resolved, I don't think that we will have a computer fully feeling us. It will mimic the emotions, and it may make us think as if they do understand us. And even I can see in the next 5 years, 10 years, Siri and Alexa will be able to react to certain emotions that we express already. But that doesn't make it as intelligent or emotionally savvy as a human being. That's still different. And we're still a long way because of that fact, because we can be self-conscious. Although our emotions are quite unconsciously expressed, which computers can to a certain extent by mimicking it. But that consciousness part and the self-consciousness at the end of our, let's say, linguistic communication, that a computer cannot really do yet. And therefore, I don't see that happening in the next 10, 20 years, but who knows?
All right.
So yes, I'm still a proponent. I'm a proponent by saying we should use computers, but our strength is exactly those. In fact, our irrationality is our strength. Being emotional is our strength. We want to have the authentic part. We want something authentic that makes us indeed human with all the weaknesses and failures that we have. That's what Hollywood movies do. We
That's
want,
good. Also,
we want the hero to fall
drama
down and
too.
raise up. We love resilience. We want this kind of roller coaster. A
That's right.
robot doesn't want that. He wants straight to the point. The more effective way, the better. He doesn't want all these emotions. Mr. Dr. Spock in Enterprise, right? Star
Yeah.
Trek. He did have no emotions.
That's good.
We don't want that man. He's useful, but we don't that kind of person. So that's, I think, the answer to the question.
Thank you banyak, Pak. Thank you banyak. Terima kasih banyak. Thank you so much, Pak Peter, Professor Peter Verhezen, for your very bold and honest opinion about AI and also future of data. We are getting so much appreciation in the chat room, Pa, and also in the Q&A. Thank you so much for all the YouTube viewers. Just a very, very last statement from you, Pa, very short. For all the students that is now currently studying for public policy, probably there will be the next policymakers. Just very short.
Well, as I said in my conclusion, we should be proud to be human. We should use computers, but be wise, smart, and use more and more algorithms, which I've called algorithmic leadership, meaning we should be normative. Policymakers are people that are basically regulating, put policies in place. That is something we cannot let automated by anybody else. It requires a model. It requires, like John Lennon said, imagine. Imagine that you can do this. Now, policymakers should do exactly that. They should make that imagined creative world that we aspire, that is meaningful. That is what policymakers should help to create and to make come true. And business should help, and civil society should aspire for that as well. And I think that's where the three comes together. And whether it's a policymaker at the government or a business person, entrepreneur, developing the algorithms, or the user, we should all be aware of the weaknesses and the strengths of what data can do for us. And at the end of the day, it's a question of what is meaningful for us professionally and personally in our life. And that meaning is the beauty of being a human being, because it's not given as such. We have to find it and we have to create it ourselves.
Right. Well, thank you so much, Papa,
Thank
Professor
you as well.
Verhezen, for your time. And also, this is very, very good for us also to understand about the future and also the data. And I wish you good luck, and also stay safe, Pa, at home, and hopefully you can be back home soon, because now you're
Thank you. Thank you so much.
So,
thank you so much, and thank you for having me, and that was an honor and a pleasure.
Thank you.
Terima kasih banyak ya.